Mike, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Mike Kiser. I'm the director of strategy and standards at SailPoint. So I do kind of product strategy. I do some internet identity standards and some working groups, and just kind of work with colleagues in the industry to try and make things better for normal people. Along with that, on the side, I do a lot of research into privacy and how to help people along the way protect themselves while they are online.
And that is a huge. I don't know. I hate saying like it's becoming more and more relevant every day, but unfortunately, I think it is becoming more and more relevant every day.
Certainly, certainly.
So today we're going to talk specifically about employment scams, and then we're going to work out and go down some fun little rabbit holes.
Sounds great.
So let's talk about how big of an issue is employment scams.
Sure. Employment scams, very understandably, have always been kind of a thing, right? They've always kind of been out there on some level. People either impersonating organizations or impersonating jobs or job offers. I would say that in the last 3 to 5 years, again, not surprisingly, since everyone's at home doing work and doing remote types of things, as identity has consequently risen in importance and is having a moment, so have job scams, right? Because now more and more, if you're doing remote work, you don't necessarily need to be in an office or on site. And so we've seen an increase year over year. I think the FTC was saying like 64% increase in 2022.
Ooh.
And so it makes sense, right? That you're doing more and more online, and you don't, like the Zoom call, right?
Yeah.
You kind of know who the person is, but you get to know someone in a remote environment rather than being in person. So seeing a rise in that is not totally surprising. And people are looking for remote work. So there's a lot of legit jobs out there that are being done all remote and distance learning, and the right to work from anywhere has this kind of a side effect as well.
Yeah, I know some people close to me early on in the pandemic where, oh, this work from home thing is going to be hideous. I don't think I can survive the first 2 weeks of this. And now they're like, I never want to go back to an office ever again in my life. And I will only consider a job if it's remote.
Totally. There's a beautiful day in Austin, Texas, one of like 14 we have each year, right? When it's not stupid hot. And I went out for a 45-minute walk today in the trees, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I were necessarily locked in an office someplace. So totally get it.
And additional time with family, no commute, all those
Right.
fun things that you get to do that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do.
Totally. Totally.
So, do you think that most of these scams are specifically targeting remote workers currently?
I think in general they are, because once you say we need you to be on site, that could be a ploy, but most often, that's a massive operation. And
Yeah.
if someone's setting up an on-site fake facility just for you personally, well, you're a treasured individual. I'll put it that way. So most often, it comes in multiple formats. But yeah, I have to say that most of them are saying this is a remote opportunity either full time or in addition to what you're already doing is very common. So
Yeah.
you say, oh, I have a day job, but I could make some money on the side in that commute I'm not doing, for instance. So yeah, it's definitely, it's like always, I would say it's targeting remote workers because another way of saying it is that phishing or these kinds of attacks or attempts at scamming people are called phishing for a reason, right? You go where the fish are.
Yeah.
And so if everyone's working remotely, make a new scam that targets remote workers, right? So
And that would be probably a shift from if you're looking 5 or 10 years ago, it was the international workers that were being targeted. Hey, there's this job in another country, but you need to
right.
do these things beforehand.
Right. And the mobility implied, you're going to catch a lot less people saying, hey, would you want to move to Botswana?
Yeah.
Well, no, I really don't. Like that, my kids are in school, it's inconvenient, there are other reasons as well. Yeah, I think the more common were more short-term of kind of scams. This job profile, job offering, job seekers being targeted is pretty fascinating because you get a high-low attack as well. It's a much wider swath of what they're trying to obtain. It's not just, hey, I'm a classic Nigerian prince emailing you out of the blue. This is much more, could be cash motivation, but there are other motivations as well.
So what are the scammers trying to obtain?
Sure. Well, it depends, right? The classic examples you see in a lot of the headlines are short-term cash. So believe it or not, some people have been mailed fake checks that they're told to go ahead and deposit and then take the money and send it someplace or buy equipment with them or something like that, right? That's your classic scam. That's kind of what I would call a smash and grab kind of vibe, right? They're doing it at scale. They're doing it, one-offs all over the place, right? And a lot of times that is not customized to the individual. I've been getting text messages quite a bit saying, hey, we've got this job over here, da 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 da. But it's obviously they have no idea what I do or how I think or anything else, right? It's not customized to me. It's more of a broad sweep. So that's more of the cash motivation, right? Then there's a different category, I'll say, that's the low end or the low attack. The high attack is much more sophisticated. It's profiling people in important or key positions in an organization or a target enterprise, getting to identify them and then trying to develop background information on them. In other words, what this does is this is more of a long-term play. I would argue, and I don't have, proof points of this because I don't know people who are actually doing this actively, but like personally, but getting like open source intelligence on people or organizations. And so what happens is I've been seeing this more and more. I've seen a bunch of fake LinkedIn profiles out there that are bridges to connection building, right? And then what they do is they use those connections to say, hey, I've got this job, and they interact with the person. And once you get a resume and other information, think about how much open source intelligence you've gotten on that individual. Now I have their home address, I have their phone number, I have their email, I may have their alternate email addresses. Now I know their entire history that may not even be on LinkedIn in terms of employment or what hobbies they have or sidecar attacks, kind of, someone from Cisco 20 years ago. Well, turns out we all know someone from Cisco 20 years ago, but human confirmation bias is like, oh, they must be all right, right? And then once they get 2 or 3 people to connect to them, then that ball is rolling, and it's much easier to build off those common connections. So it's more of I would say, a open source intelligence approach, so that when and if they get entry into the organization, now they have a scope. Now they have a map of who's who in the organization and who they really want to laterally move towards, if possible.
And what's the end game? Are they trying to get money out of that individual, intelligence out of that individual?
Not usually money, from what I've seen. It's been more intelligence and networking. It's really much more difficult to identify what they're actually looking for, right? It's not in general cash, because you're not going to say, hey, send $20,000 to apply for this job, right? So they're not being targeted at that level because they have cash, but you're not going to try and exploit them for that. It's more, I would say, building rapport, getting entry into organizations, mapping things out. And then it may be, just building a network out. The reason I say it like this too is that in 2019 at DevCon and Black Hat, the tools arsenal section, I did a talk where I wanted to know how much tracking advertisers were doing and being able to do. And so I made a completely fake identity. Her name back then was Janet. I won't give a last name. She was a designer in Austin, Texas. She was an avid jogger. I made a tool that would inject content into social media streams to obfuscate who she really was, to change advertising. So she went from running to being all into barbecue, according to how advertisers saw her, right? Yeah. But the reason I bring it up is that the hard part was getting that first person or two to connect on LinkedIn, for instance. But once I had 2 or 3, it was an easy sidestep into almost any organization. Oh, you know, so it's a really fascinating social experience. We trust people who know people.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's absolutely. Sometimes I get that random LinkedIn connection. The first thing I do is, who do we know? Who do we both know? And gee, you're only
Exactly.
connected with 6 people? Okay, something's fishy about that.
Right. Or you only have, right, you're only connected with 6 people, or you only know one person out of the industry colleagues I have. Whereas if it's 5 or 6, or if you appear, there's my own bias, but if you appear young or interested in learning, I'm going to be
Hmm.
much more open than if you say, hey, do you have a job? Or I just, or whatever else.
Yeah.
Right. So, but then building off of that, you're developing a repository of people to approach on those social media platforms also for scamming purposes if you're doing it broadly, or for targeted if you're targeting a certain level or above of individual.
Yeah, it's interesting. Both my wife and I have gotten this wave of people connecting on LinkedIn. This is probably within the last month or so. There's been this fairly significant uptick of when they're approaching me, it's young women. When they're approaching my wife, it's young men. And the connection request is just, it's always been just a little bit off. The vast majority of people are either I've used the default introduction or I've crafted something. Hey, we're in the same industry. Hey, we both know Bob, or hey, I saw that you did this and that, the other thing. Kind of the generic approaches. But they're starting to, like, you look like an interesting person to communicate with. I'm like, that's
Well, to be honest,
that's
you
odd.
do. You do, but I'm not sure I would pick you out of a lineup and say that person, right?
just really, it's just odd, just an odd type of. You look like a fun person, and I'm like, okay, if you've looked at my link, anything I've posted on LinkedIn, I really don't look like a fun person.
Clearly, you don't know me if you think I'm interesting, is what you're saying.
At
Right,
least not fun
right.
in that sense. And lo and behold, and sometimes I'm one of those people who like, yeah, I'll occasionally connect with these people because I want to see what the scam, like, I want to see what the scam is. What's the approach? And inevitably, almost all these accounts have been shut down within 24 or 48 hours. I'm sure people are, reporting them as being suspicious or something. Have you
Right. And
seen
that's
that thing going on?
yes. And I have a group of cybersecurity professionals in a Signal chat where we swap pictures and stories of people approaching us. Like, oh, this person seems legit. And usually that's in part when I made the fake identity back in 2019. I had to go find an image that was not, to be blunt, not too attractive and not unattractive either. But if it looks like some model type person, male or female, that's just a bad sign,
It's a
right?
red
It's a
flag.
trigger, right?
Yeah.
Totally. It's something you go, well, this feels a little, catfishy, so to speak. Yeah. And so we swear that we shared those kind of stories. We also share tactics. Like I know one friend who just engages them all the time. And basically his goal is to see how long he can make them waste their time
Yeah.
before they give up, either by playing stupid or asking for additional information, or telling them just a long-winded story for no reason, and eventually they're like, they just get ghosted or whatever else, right? So yeah, so it's there are different techniques there for sure.
And so, I think if you're a C level or you're the person who's being targeted, how do you discern when it's a real connection request and when it's something's fishy going on here? I mean, other
It
than the thing that you
Right,
had, gee, they're 22 years old. I'm in my 50s. That seems odd, and
right,
they don't
right.
know anyone I know. But in business, we try to connect with people. We try to expand our networks.
Right, right. I mean, it depends on your personality and your point of view, right? I think that a large number of um, people working for enterprises, their persona on LinkedIn and others are probably managed by staff, right?
Yeah.
And so some of that helps, right, in terms of having a forward guard. I think also you have to think about the use cases differently. If it's being approached for a connection versus a job interaction, right?
Yeah.
Job interactions warrant a much more cynical approach, of which I'm pretty good at. I'm a natural born cynic in terms of, yeah, I'm doubting most offers or most, contributions until they actually come. In terms of connections, I think it's much more difficult. And I think there's going to be an ongoing challenge for the cybersecurity organizations of enterprises, especially and they're already doing it these days, to start patrolling social media and the networks of their employees. And if they find a profile that is connected to multiple employees, that not that is fake, that's hard to identify, but if it claims some connection to the organization, that's a new frontier for them to at least be aware of. And depending on your budget, you have the capability or not to do that, right? If it's a job interview or offer or discussion, then I think you go through the normal steps of, looking, like we said, looking for any obvious red flags, looking for well-developed, well-written communications, looking for, things coming from the proper domain, things that we all hopefully have been trained by forced security training to learn and embrace. At the same time, short of confirming it's from a domain, I think that's going to get more and more challenging over time. Only because back when I was doing in 2019, I was using like a Markov chain generator, and it's kind of awkward. It worked most of the time, but sometimes it sounded like that Janet had fallen and hidden her head on the bathtub that morning and started tweeting. You know what I mean? These days with the generative AI, things are a lot more challenging. You used to be able to take a picture. I did this the other day. There was a picture of a suspect LinkedIn profile, and I'm like, this is a little weird. And so I took the image and I ran it through a reverse Google image search. Back in 2019, you could do that. The picture I used for my false identity, my friend called me up and said, you don't want to use this picture. I'd taken her from stock photography. And I was like, why don't I want to use this person? He said, well, have you done a reverse Google image search on her? Went out and did it. And I was like, well, how many hits? Like 5,000? He's like, no. Go do it. 25 billion.
Oh, yeah.
Because she was every bot used her, so you can't do that as much anymore though, because there's obviously, this person does not exist.com and other, places like that where you can just do a generation of a face that's unlike others. So it's more difficult these days for sure.
I guess the opposite is, are you starting to see the opposite employment scams where you have totally bogus employees looking for jobs with, for lack of it, generative careers?
Totally. I think that's on the rise as well, right? I know I have several HR professional friends, not in SailPoint, other organizations, but they have had a hard time wading through a couple different things. One is falsified backgrounds on resumes, because, like we're hinting at, as the job market has been modified, especially for the tech industry, but other industries as well, people are looking for more jobs, right? And they're trying to qualify for jobs that may not be qualified for. And some of the requirements are just ridiculous in the first place. That's a whole other conversation, right? 10 years.
I've seen some of those posts.
Starting entry job, 10 years of experience required. It's like, wait, what? But others, go ahead.
I would say in a technology that's only been around for 3 years.
Right. You first invent a time machine, go back and get experience and come back to us. Right. Exactly. The other are totally fabricated resumes and identities, right? It's more rare, but I would expect it to be on the rise, because again, that's an easy way to get to know the internals of an organization or know more about it through a relatively innocent method, right? The third rail I've seen is that people trying to take multiple jobs.
Yeah.
Where so it's inauthentic, but in a third way, right? Yeah. Where you're not getting what you think you're getting out of the person when you hire them. So, because they're split 14 ways to Sunday, so to speak. So I think that's on the rise. I think that fake identities are more and more in play for just different malicious use cases, not only job related, but as a whole in the industry and in the world.
Yeah.
So
I've heard more and more stories about people offshoring their job. They go in, they apply for the job, and they turn around and offer that job to somebody else at 50% of their pay, and they collect the difference, and they have 3 or 4 jobs where they're doing this.
totally. And that feels, to me personally, it feels like a lot of work. That better be a big payday. Maybe just because I have, multiple children as I further dox myself. But, I'm already exhausted enough without having to manage a team of people doing my jobs.
Yeah, that's crazy. So you mentioned that you're on the more cynical side, and I won't. I don't
Yes.
want to over exaggerate that for you. You can do that yourself. Have you been the victim of any scam or fraud that you know of?
Not okay. I would say not that I am aware of. Right. No one, as far as I know, has taken money from me. I haven't had any credit card fraud, as I'm just
Yeah,
inviting people to attack at this point, but that's fine. I mean, I was in some major breaches, but that was my personal information. It wasn't me
yeah.
being targeted. I would say that I'm almost certain, I could not tell you who they were, but I'm almost certain I am connected to people on LinkedIn that aren't real or who they say they are.
Hmm.
That goes along with my cynical nature, right? When someone approaches me, I'm like, okay, unless I've met them in real life,
Yeah.
and then I sanity check it a little bit, right? I saw one LinkedIn profile the other day that was clearly the same name as someone I was already connected to, but they had lifted their name, not their picture,
Okay.
but their name. So that was fascinating. Like I said, I am naturally cynical though, and so like I said, when you come and I get an email, like I've gotten emails in the past to do, say, consultative work on the side, or come and advise us and talk to us about this space and identity. And I just dismiss it out of hand because I'm like, who pays for that? And I talked to a friend the other day afterwards. He's like, oh no, you could have made really easy money for like 45 minutes of conversation. And I'm like, how, it's difficult even for me. And so you can be overly cynical,
Yeah.
right? But I have relatives that run anything that's going on through me in terms of, should I trust this? Should I not
Hmm.
trust this? One of my relatives got halfway through um, clicking through and changing a password online with a support professional for a bank
Ooh.
account until somewhere in the back of her head, I think my voice kicked in and she hung up on them and called me.
But that's
And I
what.
was like, thank
Honestly,
goodness.
that's awesome that you have a group of people that trust you enough to
Right.
to stop what they're
Sure.
doing and say, is this real or not? Because I know too many people that would get. Okay, so this morning, 3 hours ago, I got an email from a poor gentleman who met a woman on a dating app. All sorts of reasons why they could never meet in person. Her,
Yeah.
father, this, that, hospitals. Started talking crypto, started dabbling in crypto on this platform that the girlfriend recommended, and all of a sudden it's this very large amount of money, and well, to get it out, you got to, and has lost everything, borrowed money from
Oh,
everybody, including several people who told him along the way, this really sounds like a scam. If you come back and tell me I told you so. So I think there's a segment of people who they don't realize it until they're too far. They're way down the road, as opposed to I was just about to. Let me take a step back.
yeah. Yeah. And it's the old, that's why it works for some portion of the population. That's why it's profitable to
Yeah,
do this way. Right. And I think the catfishing reference we made before and the dating analogy we just made, that's what job seeking and hiring is, right? It's
yeah,
matchmaking, but just for a business, right? Oh, my heart is set on the perfect architect, right? And then you find them and wow, they have everything I wanted. Well, that's great, but maybe there's a reason why it seems. That said, we all custom write resumes to match the job,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
there's an examination, just a thought process that has to take place. Now, that said, with this generative AI stuff, That's about to get a lot more challenging, right? Because now you can't tell who can write anymore. You can't tell who can edit. You can't tell. Well, for a long time, you couldn't tell who could use grammar well because of third-party tools and that kind of thing. But it's going to be customized to what you're looking for. You know?
But okay, we're going to go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But is that a problem? But is that a problem if the person is always using Grammarly? The person their grammar is hideous. When you talk to them, you're like, oh my gosh, like
Fragments.
how in the world did you grow up in the U.S. and you can't speak like that? But if they always use Grammarly, or they're always using generative AI with a consistent voice, isn't that a skill set?
Okay. Yes. Here's my soapbox.
In a way.
Yeah. No, this is a soapbox for me. It depends on what you're hiring for, and depends on what they're using it for. If it's a tool to promote efficiency, to have good grammar, sure, right? If you're hiring them to write or create documentation, you just know what you're getting into. Back in 2017 or something, we were hiring for a person who is going to do some product marketing for an organization I was with. And she came and we said, do you have writing samples? Because I always wanted to see writing samples to know if people could write. She turned in a 400-page document.
Wow.
And I was like, this is crazy. How long did this take you? Like, this is pretty well written. And so kudos on that. Can you tell me the process you went through? Because this is remarkable. And she looked at me and said, oh, well, we outsourced that. I'm like, what did you think the point of a writing sample was? So I think you just have to know what you're getting into, right? Yeah. That's going to be more and more common. It just depends on what you need, right? The voice will be, it can be shaded based off of what it's been trained on. It's up for debate, right? I'm more pro people who actually create it themselves, unless it's like help documentation for a product. I'm probably okay that being generated. If you're writing a book, if you're writing, something more creative, then I'm okay with you using ChatGPT. Controversial opinion time. Yeah. I think that you should attribute it to ChatGPT and then set yourself as the editor. If it's ChatGPT or something else, just be clear what you've done.
So some writers association basically came out and said, whoever the editor is could take credit for it officially, according to their organization. Everything can be done ChatGPT, but the editor gets credit for it if it's a script or something like that.
Yeah, well, people do it. People already do that, right? Most people have books ghost written, right? Yep. Or heavily ghost edited. At the same time, I think what it means is you can't authenticity, and I'll bring it back to the scam thing for us here, but authenticity is going to take a hit, right? Yeah. In terms of sourcing, in terms of, did you create this? Did you write this? Did you draw this? Did you paint this? Is this really you? All of that immediately becomes more suspect, right? Yeah. Because when you read a resume, when you read a document, when you talk to someone, it's different so far. Knock on fake desk. But you get a feel for the person. You get a feel. If it's well written, you're going to trust it more. If I get a well-written scam, I'm like, oh, this seems totally legit. Crisco is obviously a cybersecurity company, or whatever, right? Yeah. But if it's got lots of issues and you can tell that it's a non-native speaker or it's just heavily flawed, you're like, well, even if this was real, I don't think I'm gonna work for an organization that sounds like that. So I think it raised the bar in terms of being able to identify some of these scams, especially if it's remote, especially if it's distant, especially if they're not on video. Like we are here. I mean, you could have fabricated this entire podcast. That's a long play.
That's a lot of work.
Right. And I'm definitely not worth it. And so if you've done that, kudos to you. But yeah, it just raised the bar in terms of what you need to be guarded about or guarded against, right? Especially as we mature as a society who's been online. And more information about me is available. And so if you wanted to recreate me personally, it should be fairly easy to do. Because I'm out there a lot. My face is out there a lot. My writing is out there quite a bit. So, the more it's out there, the more it's easier to replicate and impersonate someone on some level.
So you're talking about, kind of this concept of identity. where do you see things going in the next couple of years? Whether it's employers, employees, identity is just starting to get kind of this more nebulous thing. It used to be, here's my driver's license, here's my social security card, I'm here in front of you. And that's becoming
Yes.
less and less
Yes.
of an issue, particularly in a world where we're starting to, I have people working for me that aren't in the US. In fact, I've never met them. And I think there's a couple of people who've actually never even seen them. I don't know who they are.
Right. But you do feel like it's the same person each time.
Yeah.
That you're talking to.
Yeah.
I think that, it's a fascinating cultural moment because the pandemic shifted us all into this hyper gear that we might have gotten to before, but it accelerated things, right? To where it's not the safeguards. Identity is the key safeguard. Knowing who someone is, authenticating that, and making sure they have the right connections, the right access to people and information is huge, right? And so that means that identity is under attack as a consequence.
Mm-hmm.
I think, long term, I think that we've realized that there are a couple of standards that are coming out that are going to try to make sure that given the sensitivity and the power that identity has, that your defense against scammers is going to be you controlling information about your identity and being able to share that with others in a provably, at least until quantum computing takes over, provably cryptographically signed way, right? But all of that has to be super, super, super dead easy.
Yeah.
Right. And so long term, you could say, yeah, okay, this is a text or an email from some unknown person. Prove to me you are who you say you are with some kind of credential or identity that's signed by a secondary authority, if that makes sense. Just like, it's very different if I have a conversation and I tell you my name is Mike Kiser. It's very different than and I'm not going to pull it out on camera, but if I pull out my driver's license, and especially in real life and in your physical presence, you could look at that and see all the proofs that make sure that it's authentic, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, authenticity is going to be key, and how we prove authenticity is going to pay off in terms of protecting against scams and also be a target. Like, even as I talk about some of these digital credentials, there's some people targeting them specifically and trying to take them and reuse them with mixed success. So
identity is in this state of transition, or identity verification, I suppose, is maybe the more appropriate phrase, is in this state of flux where the resources we currently have aren't designed for an always online world.
Right. And there's an opportunity. There's a benefit, but there's also an opportunity for privacy as well here, which I'm super excited about in terms of once I give you my identity and my identity attributes, my data, who knows where that's going?
Yeah.
I don't have control over consent. Now, with GDPR and CCPA and other things, you are giving consent, right? There's potential. I'm not saying it's going to work or it's solved. Yeah. I'm saying there's potential for some of this as well, as we totally go into a side issue here. Yeah. But again, if it's not dead simple and intelligible and channeling people into best practices that protect them against scams and phishing and impersonation and job scams and all these other things, but does so in a way that protection is the easier choice, then we will have failed, right? Yeah. Because I don't want people to do it because I don't want people to take protection because they're worried about what the consequences are. I'd much prefer people to choose the right path because that's just easier than jumping through 13 hoops to make the wrong choice, right?
You don't want to be, okay, well, I need my thumbprint, and then I got an authenticator token I've got to enter, and then I have to look around like this so that you can get all the sides of my face, and then get close enough for a retinal scan in order to get in my front door.
The fact that I can have biometric strong authentication by looking at my phone, which I'm going to do anyway, and as long as that biometric information is locked into the secure enclave on the phone, it doesn't leave the phone and all that, That's fantastic. It's the same reason that people on busy streets, I'm going to try out an analogy. I'm just going to make it up right here. It's why people on busy streets build fences in their front yard on some level with small children.
Yeah.
To be more clear, right? It's not going to keep the child from climbing the fence and running out into the street and getting hit by a car, but it's going to make it a lot more work for them to do that than rather just stay in the yard and play with their ball and be happy in a safe environment. So it's that kind of guardrails to kind of funnel people into easier, better choices. So.
Okay, so now I'm going to go down another rabbit hole again because
Sure.
we're talking privacy. Security authentication. I've had this discussion with a number of people. SMS. We're talking two-factor authentication in general. Some people will be authenticity purists and say SMS is not two-factor. It's too weak. It's too abusable. It's basically useless. You're better off doing nothing. Not me. You've got a physical token. You've got software tokens, and then you've got biometrics as a fourth wheel. Where do you see the balance, and what would you suggest people do?
Yeah, complicated. You're getting into holy war territory for some people, right?
Yes.
Which makes it exciting. I would say that MFA fatigue and those kinds of things are starting to suffer from the same issues we had with passwords and others. Whereas like, oh, this is the 400th MFA I've had to accept on my phone, whatever. I'm just going to start default saying yes to everything. I think that what you can do is, I think the world is shifting from a what you know to more of a what you have combined with a who you are vibe. So I think I'm a huge fan of passkeys, which are emerging and coming out, where it's locking a biometric on your device to a key to get into something. And so it's strong biometric auth tied into, a generated key that's hopefully bound to the device, for instance. There are issues with that too. You can do bad practices, but I think that kind of thing is going to do more than say an SMS, OTP kind of thing. Now, that said, it depends on what your current state is, right? When the pandemic hit, everybody rushed to put in MFA, which was exactly the right move, right? And people found out, oh, maybe we should have scale tested this before we turned it all on. History is a good educator. But yeah, I think that something you have to, again, if you're using SMS to verify an authentication, those kinds of things, you're going to have to educate people about other potential scams and exploits. Sunjacking is the most obvious one, right? Yeah. So it just depends on what your situation is, what your budget is, it depends. As long as you're growing and maturing, I think, you can make good progress along the way, would be my hot take. It's like AI and ML, right? Another controversial. Do we have it? Of course we do. Okay, great. What's the use case though that you're serving, right? I tell customers all the time, you're going to hear a lot of terms thrown around, but find out how it addresses your pain, your felt need, and what the dangers and risks are associated with that compared to going someplace else. Like you have a choice between SMS and using passkeys or some other two-factor, I think. Go with, I would jump over SMS if possible, but it just depends on what's possible in your world and your environment.
Yeah. If grandma's not going to figure out domain keys or pass keys, she's not going to figure out carrying an authenticator with her. SMS is at least better than nothing.
Right. And what's going to happen is, despite the issue with these already, but like it's all going to be QR codes eventually, right? Which is a whole different ball of wax. But if I can not have to enter anything manually and having it all cryptographically provable via, you need to get access to this, show me, take your QR code, scan it, and then have it presented from your wallet and have consent and everything built in. That's great because people are used to using QR codes.
Yeah.
Right. Look at the airport TSA in the United States, the security, right? Am I going to use that? It's going to be easier. Oh yeah, it is. Having a boarding pass on my phone rather than a paper that I'm constantly checking. Which pocket did I put that sucker in?
Yeah,
right.
Don't go there.
Said the old man. But I think that's the gateway drug, right? You're used to it because what? They want the convenience of getting access quickly and not standing in this line. I'm going to buy my coffee. Right. And so that same thing is going to say, oh, this is just like the airport. And so
I think in the way that you're cynical about stuff, I am ultra cynical about QR codes. I just like someone ran around our neighborhood and dropped a flyer off in everybody's door that was just a QR code and saying, "Can you help?" And I'm like, "Nope."
There's a reason. There's a reason why OWASP calls it out, right? QR jacking or whatever they're calling it. Like it's inherently odd, right?
Yeah.
Because who's going to hover over that and make sense of some URL or whatever? That said, I think what you can do is have some security on. The nice part about that is that you can have security on the back end and enforce it on the device, because now you have a known space. It's not like I'm not going to take my laptop and go scan a QR code. Usually there's sometimes with a camera, but it's either ideally it's on some device that's locked down and somewhat protected, and so I can guide them into better practices like I'm talking about. The TSA use case, right? I can take that same experience, QR code, okay, you have access, and I can put heavy cryptographic stuff behind it to secure that. And my grandma, if you're going to use grandma here, my grandfather, I don't have to know anything about it, right? That's kind of genius because I haven't changed the user experience. It's still dead simple. But yeah, like I wouldn't just scan. I've always thought about doing that, right? Going to my local restaurant or whatever and putting, or even just putting a QR sticker on any poster, right? Because someone's going to scan that sucker.
Hey, next time, the next DevCon, go around slapping QR codes on things.
Yeah, because that's a target audience for that, right? I'm sure everyone's be like, yeah, so besides, it's no one's real phone anyway at that point, ideally. So yeah, I mean, it's its own thing. I think there's a place to be concerned, but I'm not in that space, to be clear, right? So I'm not the authority. I'm sure you can get lots of responses.
Of course, there'll always be someone that has something to say.
That's the fun part. That's the fun part. Yeah. So we'll all learn something.
And the job market is just gonna, like, with COVID and whatnot, the job market is gonna change. It's gonna be a different world for everybody, and we're gonna have to figure out how to interact with people in a different way.
Totally. And we are, right? And HR departments are having to handle that remote work, and where are you? It doesn't matter anymore. It depends on the industry, depends on the employer, right? Yeah. I know some major employers are like, no, of course not. We're not. You can work remotely, but we're going to fly you in. We're going to talk to you in person. You're going to spend 2 days here with 14 interviews. But not everyone has that kind of budget or bandwidth or beautiful campus to allure people with, if you know what I mean.
I can't afford that sort of thing. As we wrap up here, because we're running out of time, if people want to find out more about what you do and connect with you, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, they can find me personally on LinkedIn. As I've said, people in person, look for the hat. The password is 39452. And if I don't say that no, I'm just kidding.
And if I don't connect with you, it's because I don't think you're real.
Right. I've invalidated your very existence. No, I would say they can find me there. There's a website I can link in as well, personal website where I blog occasionally, and you'll see me around a lot talking a bunch, both on behalf of SailPoint and behalf of, I would say, the every person, ideally, in terms of privacy and security and those types of things. Always happy to talk, always happy to learn new things. Just kind of prove your identity to me and we'll be off and rolling, apparently.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks for having me.